welcome back to Basement Couch Contemplations. On this episode, I'm going to be doing another one of my two-part segments called First Take and Last Take, where I make an episode about my thoughts on a game that I've played only a few hours of. And then I'll come back, I'll discuss my thoughts after having put in a much larger amount of time into a game. This time around, I'll be talking about Stellar Blade, which is a roguelite action RPG, similar to that of Dark Souls, or games of that genre, but with some noticeable differences between them. Though the player is still required to have good reaction times and is only provided with a minimal amount of recovery items in between checkpoints. As far as the narrative goes, you play as a character named Eve, who is a sort of Alita Battle Angel type human but robot female who has amazing fighting skills. You are designed as a assault angel, which is one of the names that the characters in the game call you. And you go to Earth, which is now a dystopian version of Earth, to fend off these creatures known as Naytibas. And as you progress through the game, for as far as I have gotten, you start to learn a little bit about what remains of humanity on the planet and some of their distrust with a group that seems to exist in outer space. And there's a little bit of this kind of sci-fi religious aspects where individuals worship what is known as the Mother Sphere, who I'm still unsure about as well, but seems to be some sort of potentially super AI or supercomputer of some sort that may have had the ability to predict the future and was something that humanity relied on for its survival. So there's a lot of interesting mysteries that are there within the story, if you have an interest in that. It is much more engaging and direct and digestible than most games of this kind of genre. The game has a bit of controversy to it, but I'm not really going to be talking about that in this episode. I'm sure you've heard plenty about it already from other sources. And if not, just look up Stellar Blade controversy, and I'm sure you'll find many articles to read or videos to watch. As for the combat, I feel like it's pretty enjoyable in terms of its responsiveness is on point. I do find it very challenging to master, but not terribly punishing if you can't master it. So it's almost in this weird area where it almost feels harder than other Souls-like games, but it also kind of feels easier, especially the aspect of not being severely punished or dying and having to respawn. There's no lost experience or items of any kind, so that can kind of change the factor of how difficult this game really is. As long as you're willing to retry things, you at least don't get severely punished at every failed attempt. The game seems a lot more combo focused, as well as mastering perfect parrying and perfect dodging. If you can't do those things, then you are more punished. There isn't really very much room for invincibility frames when dodging, unless it is a perfect dodge. And even then, if the enemy is still performing a long chain combo, if you were to retaliate after that dodge, you could jump right back into taking more damage. So there is a bit of very fast-paced, on your toes thinking that this game, if you can't master it, can be quite difficult to enjoy. So I decided to use the training room as a way to kind of master those combos and the timing for perfect parries and dodges. And it is a pretty good system for training. It has a good dummy AI for fighting using a variety of attacks. But you start to get used to the timing on those specific attacks, and that's really what you're mastering. So when you take your learning and experience from there and you bring it into an actual fighting scenario, it gets chaotic because you're trying to do the things that you were doing in training, but it doesn't really work out because enemies will attack you mid-combo, and the response time switching from mid-attack to a block can sometimes feel delayed, as well as dodging, if it's not perfect, is meaningless. And it kind of creates a frustrating difficulty that doesn't necessarily have to be there. So I'd actually say the best way to describe the difficulty of this game is that your ability to survive in the game is not very difficult, but to master effective and powerful combos to quickly annihilate your enemies and to not take any amount of damage from them, that becomes a lot harder because you really have to be perfect about everything on the defensive side. As far as the game's presentation goes, I would say it's pretty good looking for a PS5 game this far into the console generation. I especially like that the frame rate and rendering is very smooth. I haven't run into any issues where I feel like there's any noticeable lag, as well as any long load times for, assets to be loading into the game as you're running through, or load times after dying are not ridiculously long. Exploration in the game feels pretty good in terms of there's a variety of things that you can encounter, such as chests that either have a code that you have to find off of a body in the environment, mini puzzles for switching around the amount of power that's given to a machine to activate it, or entering within a time limit a certain code to unlock an item. Also, mechanics like swimming underwater allows for an extra level of exploration. I at first enjoyed the music a lot, but it started to get a bit too repetitive. It may have been that I was in an area longer than others, but each zone seems to have the one looping track, which is usually subtle enough that I don't notice it in other games, but in this game in particular, there seems to be a lot of these altered vocals and some lyrics, and I think when the human voice tends to be in a song, I seem to notice the looping. So it started to become a bit annoying. But as I started to get into some further areas and move through places a bit faster, I seem to enjoy it once again. So I wouldn't say it's the best thing ever, but it also isn't so terrible that you can't play the game. The upgrading system is pretty straightforward. It seems like mostly upgrades enhance existing abilities, with the exception of a couple of things that I've unlocked so far that make it so that you can have new attacks that are specific for damaging shielded enemies or increased stun effects versus higher damage attacks. But most of the combos that you have are already there when you start the game, and it's more about improving the effectiveness of those things rather than gaining a lot of new stuff. There was one ability that I should have learned earlier, but I didn't realize exactly what it was, so I was a bit wary to invest points into it. It's the ability called Blink, which is a super important ability that I didn't really understand what it was going to do until I unlocked it, and is actually, I think, the tutorial system in the game kind of forces you to learn it, but it allows you to dodge attacks that glow blue. In a lot of these games, there's attacks that you can't just naturally block at any timing that you want or dodge it at any time, and you have to do it perfectly. And in this game, there are at least two that I've found so far where you have to dodge in a certain direction and at a certain timing. And I kept on dodging these without these abilities and not realizing that I had to have them if I wanted to survive the damage that these attacks put out. So I wish there was a little bit more earlier notification about how that worked. Maybe not fighting an enemy that uses those attacks until after you've unlocked that. But it's just a little thing. Overall, I've been having a really good time with this game, and though there are some frustrations at my inability to just learn things faster, such as the combos and timing, it's a really well-designed game. The enemy types are cool. The combat is fast-paced and feels really satisfying when you succeed. And I would put it at not the top of my list for favorite From Software replica style of game, which honestly, it would probably be better to compare this game to something like Nier Automata, story-wise as well as combat-wise, but still is a really good action RPG that I would recommend if you have any interest in combat games or just standard, more traditional action games such as Nier Automata. And I am intrigued in the storyline. I hope to know more about the history and future of humankind and really understand if I'm confused currently about what humans are, if really humanity has evolved to become part machine, is just how it is. And so when referencing humans, they're actually talking about human robots in a sense. I'm hoping those things will be cleared up as I play more. I'm interested in seeing what happens. So those are my thoughts after just around 5 hours into the game, and I'll be back to share more of what I think, see how my opinion evolves as I encounter new combat systems or big plot points come forward that maybe create twists in a storyline or just really build the world and the characters. So until then, keep on gaming and keep on creating. See you on the next one.